never believed in ghosts, not until we moved into the old house on Maple Street. It was a steal, really. 2 stories, a big yard, plenty of space for me and my wife, Emily, and our dog, Max. The place had been empty for years, and I guess no one else saw its potential. But I did. "Look at this place," I said, pushing open the creaky front door. "It's perfect." Emily hesitated on the porch, her eyes wide. "Are you sure about this, Jack? It feels, I don't know, creepy." "Creepy? Come on, it's just old. A little TLC and it'll be amazing." Max trotted in, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor. He seemed fine with the place, sniffing around and wagging his tail. Emily finally stepped inside, still looking uncertain. We spent the first few days cleaning and unpacking. Emily focused on making the house feel like home, hanging curtains, arranging furniture, putting up pictures. I tackled the minor repairs, fixing a leaky faucet here, a squeaky floorboard there. It was hard work, but satisfying. One night, after a long day of unpacking, we were sitting in the living room enjoying a glass of wine. Max was curled up at our feet, snoring softly. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you only find in the country. No traffic, no sirens, just the sound of crickets outside and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Emily sighed contentedly. "This isn't so bad after all." "See? I told you," I said, smiling at her. Just then we heard it, a faint whispering sound, like someone talking in the next room. We both froze. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, straining to listen. The whispering continued, unintelligible but definitely there. "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to sound confident. Emily didn't look convinced. "Jack, it didn't sound like the wind." "Let's check it out," I said, getting up from the couch. Max lifted his head, looking at us curiously. We walked slowly towards the hallway, the whispering getting louder with each step. It seemed to be coming from the kitchen. I flipped the light switch, and the room was bathed in a harsh yellow glow. Nothing seemed out of place. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a bit foolish. There was no answer, just the steady hum of the refrigerator. Emily clutched my arm. "This is crazy, there's no one here." "Maybe it's just the house settling," I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. "Old houses make weird noises." We went back to the living room, but the cozy atmosphere was gone. The whispering had stopped, but we were both on edge. Emily suggested we call it a night, and I agreed. As we headed upstairs, Max suddenly stopped at the bottom step, growling low in his throat. He stared up the staircase, his hackles raised. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, trying to coax him up, but he wouldn't budge. Emily looked at me, her face pale. "Jack, I'm really scared." I patted Max on the head and tried to reassure her. "It's just a new place. We're all a bit jumpy. It'll be fine." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Something about the house felt off. And that night, as I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next morning, Emily and I tried to shake off the unease from the night before. The house was quiet and peaceful in the daylight. It was easy to convince ourselves that the whispering and Max's strange behavior were just figments of our imagination. Emily decided to bake cookies to lift our spirits. The smell of chocolate and vanilla soon filled the house, making it feel warm and inviting. I took Max for a walk around the neighborhood, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. When we returned, Emily was in the kitchen humming a tune. I could almost believe everything was normal again. "Cookies are almost ready," she said with a smile. "Did you and Max have a good walk?" "Yeah, it was nice. This neighborhood is pretty quiet," I replied, scratching Max behind the ears. "Hey, maybe we should invite the neighbors over. Get to know them and show them we're not some weird recluses." Emily brightened at the idea. "That's a great plan. I'll make some extra cookies and we can bring them around. That afternoon, we visited the houses on our street, introducing ourselves and handing out cookies. Most of our neighbors were friendly and seemed happy to have new people in the neighborhood. But when we knocked on the door of the house next to ours, an elderly woman answered, her face drawn and serious. "Hello, ma'am," I said, offering a plate of cookies. "We're Jack and Emily, your new neighbors. We just wanted to say hi." The woman took the plate but didn't smile. "I'm Mrs. Thompson. Welcome to Maple Street," she said, her voice flat. She looked past us, towards our house, and frowned. "You bought the old Miller place, didn't you?" "Yes, we did," Emily said, her smile faltering. "Is there something wrong with it?" Mrs. Thompson hesitated. "That house. It has a history. The Millers left under strange circumstances." "What do you mean?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "It's not my place to say," she replied, shaking her head. "Just be careful. That house, it's not right." We thanked her and walked back home, feeling more unsettled than ever. "Do you think she was just trying to scare us?" Emily asked, her brow furrowed. "Maybe," I said, though I wasn't convinced. "Let's not worry about it. People love to tell ghost stories about old houses." That night, we settled into bed, determined to ignore Mrs. Thompson's warning. But around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They were slow and deliberate, moving closer to our bedroom door. "Jack," Emily whispered, clutching my arm. "Do you hear that?" "Yeah," I said, my heart pounding. I got out of bed and opened the door, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped. I stood there for a moment, straining to hear anything else. But there was only silence. I closed the door and climbed back into bed, trying to reassure Emily and myself that it was nothing. But then we heard it again. The whispering. It was louder this time, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Emily buried her face in my chest, trembling. "Make it stop, Jack. Please." I didn't know what to do. I felt powerless, terrified. I held Emily close and listened, hoping the whispers would fade. But they didn't. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the whispering stopped. The house was silent again, but the air felt thick with tension. "We can't stay here," Emily said, her voice shaking. "There's something in this house, Jack. We need to leave." I wanted to argue, to tell her we were overreacting. But deep down, I knew she was right. Something was wrong with this house, and whatever it was, it didn't want us here. The next morning, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table, bleary-eyed and exhausted. We hadn't slept much after the events of the previous night. The house was quiet, but the silence felt oppressive, as if it were waiting for something to happen. "We need to find out what happened here," Emily said, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "We need answers." I nodded, knowing she was right. "I'll start by looking up the history of the house. Maybe there's something in the local records or newspapers." Emily spent the day cleaning and organizing, trying to distract herself from the fear that had settled over us like a dark cloud. I drove to the town library, hoping to find some information about the Millers and our house. The librarian, a kindly old man named Mr. Hawthorne, greeted me with a smile. "How can I help you today?" "I'm looking for any information on the Miller family and their house on Maple Street," I explained. "We recently moved in and we've been experiencing some strange things." Mr. Hawthorne's expression darkened. "Ah, the old Miller place. I remember when they lived there. Let me see what I can find." He led me to the archives section and pulled out a few dusty folders. The Millers left town quite suddenly about 10 years ago. There were rumors, but nothing concrete. Here, these should help. I spent hours poring over the documents, newspaper clippings, and old photographs. The story that emerged was unsettling. The Millers had indeed left under mysterious circumstances. Neighbors reported hearing screams and seeing strange lights in the house. The Millers themselves had become reclusive, rarely leaving their home in the months before they disappeared. One article stood out. It was an interview with Mrs. Miller, published a few weeks before they left. In it, she spoke of a presence in the house, something malevolent that seemed to target her family. "We tried to ignore it at first," she was quoted as saying, "but it became more aggressive. My children were terrified, my husband was losing sleep, and I felt like I was losing my mind. We had no choice but to leave." I shivered as I read her words. It sounded all too familiar. When I returned home, Emily was waiting for me in the living room. "Did you find anything?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope and fear. I handed her the articles. "The Millers experienced the same things we have, whispering, footsteps, a sense of being watched. They left because they couldn't take it anymore." Emily read the articles, her face growing paler with each word. "What are we going to do, Jack? We can't stay here, but we can't just leave either. We put all our savings into this house." "I know," I said, feeling the weight of our situation pressing down on me. "But maybe there's a way to get rid of whatever's haunting this place." Emily looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Do you really think we can?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to try. Let's start by contacting a paranormal investigator. Maybe they can help us understand what's going on." Emily agreed, and we spent the next few days researching and calling local investigators. Most of them sounded like frauds, eager to take our money without offering any real help. But then we found someone who seemed different. Her name was Claire. She had a reputation for being thorough and honest, and her clients spoke highly of her. We arranged for her to come to the house the following weekend. When Claire arrived, she was a small woman with piercing blue eyes and an air of quiet confidence. She carried a bag filled with equipment and a notebook. "Tell me everything," she said as soon as she stepped inside. We recounted our experiences, the whispering, the footsteps, Max's strange behavior, and the Miller's story. Claire listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. "This house has a dark energy," she said finally. "Whatever is here doesn't want you here, but that doesn't mean we can't fight back." She set up her equipment, cameras, audio recorders, and a few devices I didn't recognize. "We'll start by trying to communicate with the entity. Sometimes understanding its motives can help us find a way to make it leave." As night fell, the house seemed to grow colder. We gathered in the living room where Claire had set up her base of operations. She lit a few candles and turned on her audio recorder. "If there's a spirit here, we want to understand why you're here," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Can you tell us what you want?" For a long moment there was only silence. Then the whispering started again, louder and more insistent than before. Claire's recorder picked up the sounds, but we couldn't make out any words. Suddenly, one of the cameras in the hallway fell to the floor with a loud crash. Max started barking furiously, and the air grew icy cold. "Show yourself!" Claire demanded, her voice unwavering. "What do you want from this family?" The whispering grew into a cacophony of voices, overlapping and angry. The lights flickered, and the temperature continued to drop. Emily clung to me, her fear palpable. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The lights stabilized, and the warmth returned to the room. Claire looked at us, her expression grim. "This spirit is powerful and angry, but now we know it's here. We can fight back." As we sat in the flickering candlelight, I felt a renewed sense of determination. We would not let this house drive us away. We would face whatever haunted it head-on, and we would find a way to reclaim our home. Over the next few days, Claire became a regular presence in our home. She set up more equipment and conducted further investigations, trying to piece together the story of the malevolent spirit that haunted our house. Emily and I were on edge, but Claire's confidence gave us a glimmer of hope. One evening, Claire gathered us in the living room for a briefing. "I've been analyzing the recordings and footage," she said, her eyes serious. "There's definitely a strong presence here. I believe it's connected to something that happened in this house a long time ago." Emily and I exchanged worried glances. What do you mean? I asked. Claire took a deep breath. From what I've gathered, there was a tragedy in this house long before the Millers moved in. A woman named Margaret lived here in the early 1900s. She lost her child to illness and was overcome with grief. She began performing dark rituals, trying to contact her child's spirit. It's said that she became possessed and ultimately took her own life. Emily gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. That's horrible. Claire nodded. Her spirit is likely still here, driven by her unresolved grief and anger. We need to find a way to help her move on. But how do we do that? I asked, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. We need to perform a cleansing ritual, Claire explained. It's a delicate process, and it might provoke the spirit, but it's the only way to release her from this place. We spent the next day preparing for the ritual. Claire instructed us on what to do and gathered the necessary materials: candles, sage, holy water, and a few other items that she said would help channel positive energy. As night fell, the tension in the house became almost unbearable. We began the ritual in the living room, where the activity had been the most intense. Claire lit the candles and began burning the sage, the pungent smoke filling the air. She chanted softly, invoking protective spirits and asking for Margaret's release. Emily and I stood close together, holding hands, while Max lay at our feet, surprisingly calm. The atmosphere grew heavy, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. "Margaret!" Claire called out, her voice strong and clear. "We know your story. We know your pain. It's time for you to find peace. Let go of this house and move on." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the temperature plummeted, and the candles flickered wildly. The whispering returned, louder and more frantic than ever. It was as if the very walls were vibrating with anger. "Stay strong," Claire urged us, continuing her chants. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. The whispering turned into a wail, a cry of pure anguish that seemed to pierce our very souls. Emily clung to me, trembling, while Max growled, his hackles raised. Claire stepped forward, holding out a vial of holy water. "Margaret, find peace," she repeated, her voice unwavering. She sprinkled the water around the room, the droplets hissing as they hit the floor. The wailing grew louder, then suddenly stopped. The air grew still, and the oppressive weight lifted from the room. The temperature began to rise, and the candles reignited on their own. Claire lowered her hands, looking exhausted but triumphant. "It's done," she said softly. "She's gone." Emily and I looked around, almost not daring to believe it. The house felt different, lighter, warmer. Max wagged his tail and trotted over to sniff at the sage, his earlier agitation gone. "Is it really over?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. Claire nodded. "Yes. Margaret has moved on. This house is yours now." We thanked Claire profusely, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. That night, for the first time since we moved in, we slept peacefully. The whispers, the footsteps, the feeling of being watched, all of it was gone.